30,000 Roman legionaries stumble backward in absolute terror, their carefully practiced formations dissolving into chaos. The battle line shatters completely under the relentless barbarian onslaught sweeping across the field. Agonized screams pierce the morning air as warriors fall like grain before the harvester's blade, blood soaking into the trampled earth. The consul observes from his trembling horse, frozen in complete paralysis by the catastrophe unfolding before his eyes. Within mere minutes, 2 entire Roman legions will cease to exist, massacred to the last man in what will become one of Rome's most humiliating defeats. Then, emerging slowly from the reserve positions behind the collapsing lines, come soldiers without gleaming ceremonial armor or polished equipment that catches the sunlight. They move in absolutely perfect formation, each step measured and deliberate, boots striking the ground in perfect unison. The barbarian warriors do not comprehend what force they now face until the moment arrives far too late for retreat or reorganization. These are the Evocati, the single most lethal military force Rome ever conceived and deployed across its expanding empire. Veterans deliberately called back from well-earned retirement for one final desperate campaign when everything hangs in the balance. They are not your ordinary legionaries fresh from training camps in Italia. They are professional killers, masters of death with decades upon decades of battlefield experience etched into their very souls. Bodies built from iron-hard muscle tempered by surviving 100 separate battles across 3 continents. Each individual veteran has personally killed more enemy combatants than most men could accurately count in a lifetime of warfare. They receive payment at double a centurion's already generous rate, wealth that would make them rich men. They obey only one supreme general, completely ignoring Senate authority and political machinations in Rome. Nobody knows exactly how many exist at any given moment throughout the empire's vast territories. They represent Rome's most carefully guarded secret weapon, hidden in plain sight among the regular legions. But one profoundly disturbing question emerges that no historian has ever satisfactorily answered through careful research and examination of surviving records. Why did Rome desperately need such an extraordinary force in the first place? Why were the regular legions, trained rigorously from their youth in discipline and combat techniques, somehow not sufficient for the empire's needs? What unimaginable threats did the empire face that required forcibly pulling experienced veterans out of peaceful retirement? The answer reveals a genuinely dark secret lurking at the heart of Roman military power and imperial expansion. Regular legions won conventional wars of territorial conquest against relatively predictable barbarian enemies using standard tactics. The Evocati existed exclusively for those rare situations where losing meant the complete literal end of Rome itself as a civilization. The true story of the Evocati begins with blood, betrayal, and desperation on the empire's most vulnerable frontiers, where Roman power met its greatest challenges. Year 58, B.C. Julius Caesar has just arrived in Gaul as the newly appointed proconsul with exactly 4 legions under his direct command, a formidable force on paper. Dangerous barbarian territory stretches before him in every direction. Germanic tribes continuously crossing the Rhine River in massive numbers, Celtic confederations openly threatening the Roman provincial borders with increasing boldness. Caesar desperately needs victory after victory to properly feed his consuming political ambitions back in Rome, where enemies multiply daily. But he immediately faces one critical problem no other Roman general has successfully solved before him in similar circumstances. His legions are completely new, possessing virtually no real combat experience whatsoever against determined enemies. Young recruits trained for endless months in perfectly safe camps, located deep inside secure Roman territory, far from danger. They learn proper formations, marching discipline, fortification construction techniques with mathematical precision. They practice endlessly with wooden training swords against stationary posts, memorizing complex orders delivered in formal Latin by their instructors. But no amount of training can truly replicate the absolute chaos of genuine battle against warriors fighting for their homeland. The paralyzing terror of witnessing your closest comrade suddenly decapitated directly beside you, blood spraying across your face. The overwhelming smell of fresh blood and spilled entrails baking under the merciless burning sun, mixed with the stench of fear. That critical moment when your carefully drilled formation unexpectedly collapses, and you must instantly decide between shameful flight or honorable death. Inexperienced recruits break completely in their very first real combat engagement, running like frightened children. Caesar observes this fundamental problem with absolutely cold clarity during a minor skirmish against the migrating Helvetii tribes crossing into Gaul. His supposedly elite 9th Legion scatters in complete disorder when enemy cavalry unexpectedly charges hard into their exposed flank with tremendous force. Panicked soldiers throw down their heavy shields and run blindly toward the camp. Centurions shout desperate orders into the chaos, their voices lost. Nobody hears anything through the screaming and clash of weapons. In barely 20 minutes of confused fighting, over 800 men die completely unnecessarily because irrational panic spread faster than the actual enemy advance across the battlefield. Caesar needs far more than simple numbers to achieve conquest of Gaul. He needs experienced men who genuinely do not know fear anymore, men forged in the fires of war. Men who have witnessed death so many countless times, they ignore it completely, functioning with mechanical efficiency even in the worst circumstances. He sends trusted messengers throughout the Italian peninsula with carefully secret orders written in his own hand. They seek very specific veterans from previous brutal campaigns in Hispania, Africa, and the Eastern territories under various commanders. Men who served under Pompey the Great, under Lucullus, under any general who faced truly brutal wars of attrition against determined foes. Not just any veteran will suffice for Caesar's purposes and vision. They must possess at least 15 full years of continuous active military service without break. They must have survived at least 5 major pitched battles against determined enemies who refuse to surrender. They must be genuinely willing to abandon their hard-won farms, their families, their blood-earned peaceful retirement in the countryside. In exchange, Caesar offers something no professional soldier can possibly refuse, no matter how comfortable their current life. Gold and glory far beyond any normal compensation package, wealth that will set up their families for generations. The first 50 veterans arrive at Caesar's military camp in Gaul exactly 3 weeks later, traveling from across Italia. They do not march in neat parade formation like the young legionaries constantly drilling in the practice fields. They walk with the casual confidence of apex predators surveying their hunting grounds, aware of their own lethal capabilities. Every single movement carefully calculated to conserve precious energy for when it truly matters in combat. Their weathered bodies clearly show the terrible cost of decades of continuous warfare across the empire. Missing fingers, badly broken noses, healed crooked, terrible scars that cross entire faces in jagged lines. Many limp noticeably from old wounds that healed poorly without proper medical attention in field hospitals. But their eyes carry that distinctly empty stare only men who have personally killed 50 or more develop over time, having seen too much death. These hardened veterans need absolutely no basic training whatsoever in fundamental military skills. They know every single dirty trick, every subtle weakness in every enemy formation ever deployed by any culture. Every possible way to kill a man with maximum brutal efficiency and minimum wasted effort or motion. They can march 50 full kilometers in a single day carrying complete equipment without complaint or requesting rest. They build defensive fortifications in half the time required by regular legions, their experience showing in every decision. When actual combat finally arrives, they advance without any hesitation whatsoever, without ever breaking formation regardless of pressure from the enemy, never retreating under any circumstances, even when situations seem hopeless to younger men. The barbarians face men who have spent their entire adult lives perfecting the precise art of death in all its forms. They do not carry the standard legionary eagle that represents Rome's power and glory. Their personal standards display individualized symbols meaningful only to them, earned through blood. The name Evocati sounds almost innocent, bureaucratic even, like a minor administrative detail. It deliberately hides the brutal reality of what they truly represent. A private shock force loyal exclusively to the general, who personally summoned them from retirement, operating completely outside Rome's traditional military command structures and legal frameworks. The Senate does not officially approve their existence or deployment. They do not appear in any formal military records kept in Rome's archives. They exist in the deep shadows of Roman power, an open secret everyone knows but nobody acknowledges. The first real test of the Evocati arrives faster than anyone anticipated or prepared for. The Germanic tribes under their king Ariovistus cross the Rhine with 120,000 screaming warriors seeking new lands. They demand significant territory inside Gaul as their right. They threaten to invade the Roman province directly if Caesar dares to interfere with their migration. Caesar's legions total barely 30,000 men, but morale is already broken before fighting even begins, fear spreading like disease. The young soldiers have heard terrifying stories about the Germans. Blonde giants who drink enemy blood from skulls, fight completely naked without armor, never retreat under any circumstances even when surrounded. Paralyzing fear spreads through the camp like plague, infecting everyone. Centurions report desertion attempts every single night, men trying to slip away into the darkness. Caesar summons his military tribunes for an emergency council meeting in his command tent. They propose waiting for reinforcements from Italy, retreating to safer territory behind the provincial borders, negotiating with Ariovistus for peace. Caesar rejects every single suggestion with icy silence, his face betraying no emotion. Then he does something no Roman general has ever attempted before in recorded history, a decision that seems insane. He orders all regular legions to remain safely in camp behind the fortifications. Only the Evocati will march to meet the Germanic army in the field. 150 veterans against 120,000 barbarians seeking blood and glory. The tribunes believe Caesar has completely lost his mind, succumbed to madness or desperation. The Evocati simply check their equipment methodically and march at dawn without comment or complaint. Caesar's strategy is not quite as suicidal as it initially appears to his panicked officers. The Evocati are not going to fight a conventional pitched battle against impossible odds. They're going to send a very specific message the young legions lack the proper temper to deliver effectively. They march straight toward the Germanic camp without attempting any concealment whatsoever, moving in daylight. Ariovistus watches from his command tent, genuinely confused by this tiny force advancing without apparent fear toward certain death. The Germans surround the Evocati completely, laughing, shouting insults in their harsh language. They expect the Romans to beg pathetically for their lives, to surrender and grovel. Instead, the veterans form testudo, shields interlocked overhead and on all sides, creating an impenetrable steel tortoise that moves as one organism. The Germans attack with spears, axes, long swords, swung with tremendous force. Metal bounces off Roman shields without causing any significant damage to the men inside the formation. The Evocati do not counterattack yet, showing remarkable discipline. They simply maintain absolutely perfect formation, advancing meter by meter toward the center of the barbarian camp with mechanical precision. The Germans push, pull, try desperately to break the formation with brute strength. Nothing works at all against their coordinated defense. After 2 full hours of useless attacks that achieve nothing, the barbarians are exhausted, confused, frustrated by their failure. Then the Evocati break formation and attack with devastating speed and coordination. What follows is not battle in any traditional sense. It is methodical carnage executed by absolute masters of their craft who have done this 1,000 times. Every Evocati moves with surgical precision, no wasted motion anywhere, no wild swings hoping to connect. Block with shield, stab with short gladius directly in the abdomen where armor is weakest, withdraw blade. Move immediately to next enemy without pause or hesitation. They work in coordinated pairs, covering each other's flanks perfectly, rotating positions to keep fresh men at the front and wounded men protected in the rear. The Germans fight with individual fury, each warrior seeking personal glory and honor in single combat. The Evocati operate like a killing machine, every piece synchronized with the others in perfect harmony. In 3 hours of continuous combat, 800 Germans lie dead or dying on the blood-soaked ground. The Evocati withdraw in perfect formation, leaving a clear message on the field written in Germanic blood. They took no prisoners, took no trophies or souvenirs, did not celebrate their victory, simply killed efficiently and returned to camp in silence. Ariovistus understands he faces something completely different from the Celtic armies he previously conquered with ease. These Romans do not fight for honor or tribal glory like his warriors. They fight with the industrial coldness of men who turned war into a profession, a craft to be perfected. The Germanic king sends messengers to Caesar that same night, requesting negotiations immediately. Caesar accepts, but his terms are absolutely non-negotiable without any room for compromise. The Germans return across the Rhine immediately, abandoning their territorial claims in Gaul. The news of what happened spreads through the Roman camp faster than any official order from headquarters. The fear of the Germans evaporates instantly like morning mist. If 150 veterans can humiliate an entire barbarian army, then 30,000 organized Romans are invincible against any foe. Morale transforms from paralyzing terror to aggressive confidence in a single night, completely reversing the psychological situation. Caesar achieved his goal without risking his main legions in battle. The Evocati proved to be exactly the psychological weapon he needed at exactly the right moment. But this creates a new problem. Caesar did not fully anticipate in his planning. The regular legionaries now see the Evocati as demigods, mythical figures beyond human capabilities. Mythical figures impossible to equal no matter how hard they train. The veterans remain separate, speak little to the younger soldiers, never mingle with the young troops in the camps or share meals. This distance generates admiration mixed with resentment and feelings of inadequacy. The centurions of the regular legions feel their authority eroding day by day. Soldiers question orders, asking what the Evocati would do in that situation instead of obeying immediately. Caesar implements a carefully designed rotation system to address this growing problem. Each regular legion receives 10 Evocati, assigned as tactical instructors embedded within the units. They hold no official rank within the legion's hierarchy. They cannot give direct orders to anyone. They simply train, advise, demonstrate advanced techniques developed over decades. The young legionaries learn by watching how the veterans move, how they assess terrain for advantages, how they maintain calm under extreme pressure when others panic. Slowly, the concentrated experience spreads throughout the entire army like water seeping into dry ground. Caesar's legions begin to fight with the ruthless efficiency previously shown only by the called-back veterans with decades of experience. This exchange transforms the fundamental character of the Roman army in Gaul over the following months. Before, the legions depended on rigid formations and blind obedience to orders without thinking. Now every individual soldier thinks tactically, adapts to combat according to the enemy's actions, makes independent decisions when the situation requires initiative. Centurions report that their men no longer panic when things go wrong on the battlefield. Instead, they automatically reorganize, seek advantages in the terrain, continue fighting without constant orders from above. Caesar's legions become something Rome had never seen before in its long military history. Armies of veterans, even with only 2 years of service under their belts. The transformation extends beyond mere combat effectiveness on the battlefield. The Evocati teach survival skills that separate living soldiers from dead heroes, buried in foreign soil. How to identify which water sources are safe to drink in enemy territory without contracting dysentery. How to construct shelters that remain warm in bitter winter while conserving precious firewood supplies. How to identify edible plants when supply lines collapse and starvation threatens the army. How to treat battlefield wounds using materials available in the field when medical officers are overwhelmed with casualties. These mundane skills prove just as valuable as sword techniques during the brutal Gallic campaigns that stretch across years. The veterans share hard-earned wisdom about maintaining equipment in campaign conditions far from Roman workshops. How to properly care for leather armor so it does not rot in constant rain. how to sharpen blades using river stones when whetstones are unavailable, how to repair damaged chainmail using wire salvaged from broken equipment, how to waterproof tents using animal fat rendered from captured livestock. Young legionaries absorb this knowledge eagerly, understanding these skills mean survival in hostile lands far from civilization. But the true value of the Evocati is revealed during the siege of Avaricum, winter of 52 BC in Gaul. The Celtic coalition under Vercingetorix adopts scorched earth strategy, destroying their own cities to deny resources to Caesar's army. Avaricum is the exception, a wealthy city left standing. Caesar needs to take it before his army starves in the harsh winter. Roman engineers build siege towers, battering rams, earthworks, all useless against the massive defenses built over generations. The Evocati study the walls for 3 full days without speaking to anyone, walking the perimeter. Then they present Caesar with a plan no military engineer would approve as sound or safe. They will not attack the walls directly in frontal assault. They will attack the foundations beneath the walls. They explain that Celtic fortifications are built on buried wooden beams that distribute the weight of the stone above. If those beams are weakened or destroyed through fire, entire sections of wall will collapse under their own weight. But executing this requires digging tunnels under enemy defenses while arrows, stones, and boiling oil rain from above, suicide work that no regular legionary would voluntarily accept even under threat of punishment. The Evocati do not ask for volunteers from among their ranks. They simply take tools and begin digging without discussion. They work in 4-hour shifts, excavating under the north wall while Celtic defenders try to stop them with projectiles. Roman archers maintain constant pressure from siege towers, but cannot fully protect the miners working below. Casualties begin to accumulate steadily. 3 veterans dead the first day, 5 the second day of digging. The Evocati continue digging without showing any emotion or slowing their pace. For them, this is simply another job that needs completion. The odds of death do not change the fact that someone must do it, and they are the ones capable. After 9 days of relentless work in darkness, the tunnels reach the wooden foundations supporting the wall. The Evocati fill the cavities with flammable materials, dry wood, oil, anything that burns hot and long. They wait until midnight when the exhausted Celtic defenders sleep at their posts. Then they ignite the fire and withdraw at a safe distance. The flames consume the support beams for hours underground, weakening the structure. At dawn, a sound like thunder echoes across the battlefield. 100 meters of wall collapse in a cascade of rock and dust, creating a massive breach. The breach opens a direct path into Avaricum for the waiting legions. Caesar's legions charge through the gap before the Gauls can organize coherent defense of the breach. What follows is merciless massacre without quarter given. The Romans are hungry, furious after weeks of siege, thirsty for revenge against those who burned their own lands. 40,000 inhabitants of Avaricum are executed in 6 hours of slaughter. Caesar needs other Celtic cities to see the price of resistance clearly. The Evocati do not participate in the massacre at all. Their work ended when the wall fell and the breach opened. They rest in their tents, indifferent to the screams coming from the burning city. This victory temporarily breaks the Celtic coalition arrayed against Rome. Several tribes send envoys offering submission and hostages, But Vercingetorix understands something other Celtic leaders ignore completely. Caesar depends completely on his evocati for critical operations requiring expertise. If those veterans can be eliminated in one decisive engagement, the Roman army will lose its decisive advantage over the Gauls. The Celtic leader begins planning operations specifically designed to force the evocati into open combat, where they can be surrounded and annihilated by superior numbers. The war in Gaul transforms into a personal duel between Vercingetorix and Caesar's veterans, each trying to outwit the other. The trap is set at Gergovia, capital of the Arverni tribe in central Gaul. Vercingetorix fortifies the city on an elevated plateau accessible only by narrow, steep paths easily defended. He challenges Caesar to try to take it, knowing the difficulty. Caesar recognizes the provocation, but cannot ignore it entirely. Leaving Gergovia intact would allow Vercingetorix to rebuild his coalition stronger than before. Caesar orders a frontal assault, something he would normally never consider given the terrain. The evocati warn it is obvious suicide, a trap waiting to close. Caesar insists stubbornly. He needs psychological momentum after Avaricum. He needs to prove no Celtic fortress can resist Roman siege, regardless of position. The veterans obey without further argument, but prepare wills before marching to battle. The assault begins at dawn with trumpets blaring. Legions advance up narrow paths under constant rain of projectiles from above. Stones, spears, arrows fall from the walls above. Men die before reaching the actual walls, crushed by rocks. The evocati lead the advance, their shields absorbing the punishment meant for troops behind them. They reach the city gates and begin forcing them with battering rams. For a moment, impossible victory seems within reach as gates crack. Then Vercingetorix executes his planned counterattack with devastating effect. Thousands of Celtic warriors emerge from positions hidden on the slopes, completely surrounding the Roman forces from behind. The evocati find themselves trapped between Gergovia's walls and the Celtic army, cutting their retreat to camp. The regular legions in the rear begin collapsing under pressure, routing. Caesar watches from below, unable to intervene or send reinforcements. The veterans form a defensive circle, back to back, preparing to die fighting, selling their lives dearly. But they do not fight to survive this engagement. They fight to keep the Gauls occupied long enough for the young legions to escape the trap. It is calculated sacrifice, coldly professional without sentiment. Protect the army's most valuable asset, the trained legionaries, at the cost of their own lives without hesitation. 700 Roman legionaries die at Gergovia in the bloodiest day of the campaign. 43 of them are evocati, irreplaceable veterans. Caesar loses nearly a third of his most experienced veterans in a single day of fighting. The army retreats in disorder, pursued by Celtic cavalry seeking to destroy them completely. It is Caesar's first serious defeat in Gaul after years of unbroken victory. The Gauls celebrate as if they had won the war entirely, dancing and feasting. Vercingetorix is proclaimed savior of Gaul by previously hostile tribes. Previously neutral tribes join his cause with fresh warriors. 150,000 Celtic warriors gather under his banner, the largest army ever assembled in Gaul. Caesar faces complete annihilation of his army and the end of his political career back in Rome. But Caesar turns disaster into opportunity with characteristic cunning. He deliberately retreats, drawing Vercingetorix onto terrain favorable to Romans and away from his bases. The Celtic leader, intoxicated by victory and confidence, makes the fatal mistake Caesar expected and planned for. He aggressively pursues the Roman army instead of maintaining defensive position in the hills. Vercingetorix fortifies the city of Alesia, convinced Caesar must attack to save his reputation after Gergovia. 80,000 Celtic warriors occupy the elevated city on the plateau. Another 70,000 camp in surrounding hills as relief force ready to attack. Caesar has 40,000 hungry, exhausted legionaries badly demoralized. The odds are absolutely impossible by any calculation. The surviving Evocati gather with Caesar in his command tent for strategy discussion. They propose something that sounds insane to everyone present. They will not attack Alesia directly in frontal assault. They will build a double siege unprecedented in military history. Inward walls containing Vercingetorix and preventing escape. Outward walls defending against the relief army attacking from outside. They will trap the Gauls between two lines of Roman fortifications and wait for hunger to do the work of killing them. Caesar calculates the materials needed for such an undertaking. 30 kilometers of walls, ditches, towers, traps extending in both directions. It requires weeks of intense work while two enemy armies watch and prepare to attack. A single mistake, and Romans will be crushed between both forces like grain between millstones. Caesar orders construction to begin immediately, despite the protests of his officers. Legions work 12-hour shifts, digging ditches, raising palisades, building watchtowers with timber. The Evocati supervise every section of construction, identifying weaknesses before they become disasters that could collapse the entire plan. The Gauls attack constantly, trying to disrupt the work and prevent completion. Romans continue building while fighting off attacks simultaneously. Every meter of wall is paid with bloodshed by exhausted soldiers, but fortifications advance inexorably toward completion. After 3 weeks of continuous labor, 30 kilometers of defenses completely surround Alesia on all sides. Vercingetorix is trapped like an animal in a cage he cannot escape. The relief army cannot reach him without breaking Roman lines in force. The Gauls launch their first massive assault against the outer fortifications facing outward. 70,000 warriors charge simultaneously from all directions, screaming war cries. Roman towers fire projectiles, stones and javelins. Ditches slow the advance, channeling attackers. Hidden traps claim hundreds of victims stumbling into stakes, but Celtic numbers are overwhelming despite losses. They break the first defensive line at 6 different points through sheer weight. The Evocati rush from breach to breach, plugging every hole with their own bodies and shields. They fight for 18 continuous hours without rest or food, rotating positions only when too wounded to hold a shield properly. 32 veterans die that day defending the line. The Gauls retreat at dusk, leaving 8,000 corpses rotting in the sun. Vercingetorix watches from Alesia's walls, helpless to assist his people. He understands his only chance is coordinating simultaneous attack from inside and outside to split Roman attention. He sends secret messengers to the relief army with a detailed plan written on tablets. 3 days later, at dawn, 100,000 Gauls attack Roman lines from both directions, simultaneously in coordinated assault. Romans face pressure on every centimeter of their defenses in both directions. Legions are spread so thin there are fewer than 200 men per kilometer of wall to defend. The Evocati divide into teams of 5 veterans, each team responsible for a critical sector where breakthrough seems imminent. They become tactical firefighters, rushing to any point where lines begin to give way under pressure. Caesar himself takes a sword and joins the fight, not as distant general giving orders, but as another soldier in the line fighting for survival. Legionaries see him fighting beside them, covered in enemy blood, and find strength they did not know they possessed within themselves. The Evocati create a torch signal system, instantly communicating which sectors need reinforcement urgently. Legions flow like water, concentrating where pressure is greatest, thinning where enemy hesitates or pulls back. Battle becomes pure endurance test over days. Not who fights better wins, but who can continue fighting when all seems lost and bodies scream for rest. On the 3rd day of the final assault, Roman provisions are completely exhausted after weeks. No food remains, little water. Wounded die for lack of medical supplies or attention. Legionaries are so exhausted some fall asleep standing, holding their shields through pure will. Gauls launch another massive assault, detecting Roman weakness in the lines. They break defensive lines in the northern sector through concentrated attack. Thousands of warriors pour through the breach, cutting Roman communications between forts. Caesar's army fragments into isolated pockets, each fighting its own desperate battle, unsure if others still exist or have been overrun. The Evocati face their definitive moment in the campaign. 78 surviving veterans against 10,000 Gauls controlling the critical pass between inner and outer fortifications at the strategic junction. If Gauls hold that position, they can unite both armies and destroy Romans piece by piece methodically. Veterans charge straight into the center of the enemy mass without hesitation or fear. No formation, no elegant tactic. Only brutal violence concentrated at one point like a spear thrust. They open a bloody corridor through the Gauls, allowing fragmented legions to reconnect and reform. 53 Evocati die in that charge, their bodies left where they fell. The 25 survivors are so wounded they cannot continue fighting anymore. Caesar watches his most lethal force bleed out before his eyes on the battlefield. The Evocati, who transformed his legions, who won impossible battles, who saved his army dozens of times from destruction, now lie broken and bleeding in the mud of Alesia. But their sacrifice bought the precious time Caesar needed desperately. Legions reform coherent lines with veteran leadership. Reinforcements reach critical sectors under pressure. Gauls, exhausted after 3 full days of continuous combat without sleep, lose momentum and cohesion. Vercingetorix watches from Alesia's walls as his relief army crumbles and begins to retreat. Thousands of warriors begin to withdraw from the field. Retreat becomes rout, becomes panicked flight into the forests. The siege of Alesia ends with impossible Roman victory snatched from defeat. Vercingetorix surrenders the next day in elaborate ceremony. He leaves Alesia mounted on his finest horse, wearing his finest armor and gold. He rides to Caesar's tent and throws his weapons at the Roman general's feet in submission. 80,000 Gauls inside Alesia die of starvation in the following weeks while Romans watch. Caesar deliberately lets them die, sending another message about the cost of resisting Rome to other tribes. Gaul is completely pacified after years of rebellion. Caesar returns to Rome as supreme conqueror of the Western barbarians, but he does so without the Evocati who made his victory possible through their sacrifice. Only 25 of the original veterans survive Alesia in fighting condition after the siege. Caesar's success with the Evocati does not go unnoticed by other ambitious men. Other Roman generals begin copying the system for their own campaigns. Pompey summons veterans for his Hispania campaigns against rebel tribes. Mark Antony recruits Evocati for his eastern operations. Every powerful general builds his own force of veterans, loyal only to him personally. The Senate watches with growing alarm and suspicion. These private forces operate completely outside state control and law. They are personal armies disguised with respectable names that sound bureaucratic. Rome is creating the tools of its own destruction, weapons that will eventually be turned inward against itself. Year 49, B.C. The conflict between Caesar and the Senate reaches breaking point after years of tension. Senators demand Caesar disband his legions and return to Rome as private citizen without military command. Caesar refuses flatly. The Senate declares Caesar enemy of Rome and orders Pompey to destroy him militarily. Caesar faces impossible decision with terrible consequences. Obeying means political and probably physical death at hands of enemies. Disobeying means civil war that will bleed the empire dry for years. Caesar crosses the Rubicon with his legions, defying Roman law forbidding armed armies in Italy proper. The Roman Republic enters its final agony that will last decades and destroy millions. Caesar's Evocati march with him toward Rome, but now face a moral dilemma they never contemplated before. They are not going to fight foreign barbarians threatening the empire. They are going to kill other Romans, possibly friends, family, comrades from previous campaigns under different commanders. Many veterans served under Pompey before joining Caesar in Gaul. They know the men they will face in battle personally. They drank with them, shared tents during brutal winters in Hispania, saved their lives in combat against barbarians. Now they must kill them because two ambitious politicians cannot share power peacefully. Some Evocati desert before war begins, unable to stomach it. Most remain loyal to Caesar for reasons even they do not fully understand or articulate. Caesar's legions advance rapidly through Italy, encountering little resistance. Pompey retreats, refusing to face Caesar in direct battle on Italian soil. He understands the Celtic veteran legions are superior to his own troops in experience. Pompey completely evacuates Italy with his entire army, taking his forces to the Greek East, where he can recruit reinforcements and receive supplies from client kings. Caesar pursues relentlessly across the Adriatic Sea. The two forces finally clash at Pharsalus in Thessaly, Greece. 45,000 of Caesar's legionaries against 50,000 of Pompey's assembled forces. But numbers do not tell the real story of capability. Caesar has 800 Evocati embedded in his legions. Pompey has 300 in his forces. That difference in veteran experience will determine Rome's fate for generations to come. The Battle of Pharsalus begins at dawn on August 9th, 48 B.C. Pompey positions his cavalry on the right flank, 7,000 horsemen against Caesar's 1,000 riders. His plan is simple and proven. Cavalry will crush Caesar's flank with overwhelming force, encircle his legions from behind, destroy them systematically from rear. It is proven tactic that worked hundreds of times in previous battles. Pompey is so confident in numerical superiority, He promises victory before noon to his officers. Caesar observes enemy deployment from his command position and smiles knowingly. Pompey fell into the exact trap Caesar prepared days ago. The Evocati wait, hidden behind the main line in reserve positions, invisible to Pompey's scouts observing the field. Pompey's cavalry charges with arrogant confidence across the plain. 7,000 horsemen at full gallop, lances ready, expecting to break Caesar's thin cavalry line in seconds easily. Caesar's horsemen retreat orderly, exactly as Pompey anticipated in his planning. Pompeian cavalry accelerates, pursuing what they believe is easy victory and broken enemy. Then Caesar unleashes the Evocati from concealment. 800 veterans emerge. From behind the lines against enemy cavalry flanks from unexpected angle, but they do not fight like traditional infantry meet cavalry. They ignore the riders completely and attack the horses directly with short gladii aimed at legs and bellies. Horses fall screaming, legs cut through, bellies open spilling entrails. Riders are thrown to ground violently, where Evocati execute them efficiently before they can rise and draw weapons. The cavalry charge becomes bloody chaos within minutes. Pompey's horsemen try to retreat from the slaughter, but the mass of their own men behind pushes them forward onto Roman swords relentlessly. In 20 minutes of carnage, Pompey's finest cavalry is destroyed or fleeing the field in panic. The Evocati do not pursue the routing cavalry. They immediately turn and attack the exposed flank of Pompeian infantry standing in formation. Pompey's army collapses like a house of cards under the pressure. Caesar's legions advance, turning collapse into rout into massacre. 15,000 of Pompey's soldiers die at Pharsalus that day. Another 24,000 are captured or surrender. Caesar loses 200 legionaries in the entire battle. No Evocati dies that day on the field. Pompey flees to Egypt, seeking refuge from the boy king. The Egyptian king, hoping to gain Caesar's favor and alliance, orders Pompey's assassination on the beach. When Caesar arrives in Egypt weeks later, he is presented with Pompey's severed head as a gift from the young king. Caesar weeps openly, seeing the remains of his old friend and ally. But tears do not change reality or bring the dead back to life. Pompey's sons continue the war in Hispania with legions inherited from their father still loyal to his name. Mark Antony controls the East with his personal veterans answering to him. Marcus Aemilius Lepidus rules Africa with another private army under his command. Rome fragments into personal military domains ruled by warlords. The Evocati, created to protect the empire from external enemies threatening civilization, now guarantee Rome will tear itself apart from within. Every faction has its force of loyal veterans who will kill on command. Every leader trusts soldiers who follow him personally before the Republic or law. The system that made Rome invincible against barbarians is destroying it from within through civil war. Caesar tries to break this cycle of violence. After Pharsalus, he discharges most of his Evocati with generous pensions and land in Italy to retire permanently. He thanks them for their service, honors them publicly in ceremonies, but makes clear their time is over and they must leave. Many know no other life than war after decades. They spent decades killing and now must learn to be farmers or merchants in peaceful society. Some succeed, finding peace on lands they conquered with blood years ago. Others drink themselves to death, unable to live without combat adrenaline and brotherhood of the legion. The legacy of the Evocati extends far beyond their battlefield achievements and tactical innovations. They fundamentally transformed how Rome understood military service and professional warfare. Before the Evocati, soldiers served their mandatory years and returned to civilian life completely. The concept of career soldiers who could be recalled for critical missions represented a radical departure from tradition. It created a class of men whose identity centered entirely on warfare, who possessed skills applicable only to killing. This transformation carried profound social consequences that rippled through Roman society for generations. Veterans struggled to reintegrate into peaceful communities after decades of service abroad. They had witnessed atrocities, committed acts they could never speak about openly, developed perspectives incompatible with civilian values. Many formed tight communities with other veterans, the only people who understood their experiences and shared their burdens. These veteran settlements became important political constituencies that generals courted for support, further blurring the lines between military and civilian spheres. The end came not with glory, but with quiet dissolution into history's shadows, their story preserved only in fragments and scattered references in ancient texts that hint at their existence without fully acknowledging their impact on Rome's destiny. Yet, even in dissolution, the Evocati maintained their mystique and influence over Roman military thinking. The generation that survived Caesar's campaigns became legendary figures in their communities, respected elders whose counsel was sought on matters of war and strategy. Young men seeking military careers traveled to visit these aging warriors, hoping to learn the secrets that made them invincible on the battlefield. The veterans shared what wisdom they could, but always emphasized the same truth. Experience cannot be taught, only earned through surviving combat after combat until instinct replaces thought. Some Evocati found new purpose training the next generation of Roman soldiers at military camps throughout the empire. They served as instructors, drilling raw recruits in the fundamentals of warfare with the same brutal efficiency they applied to killing enemies. These training camps produced legionaries of exceptional quality, men who fought with the discipline and tactical awareness previously seen only in veteran units. The influence of the Evocati thus extended beyond their own service, shaping Roman military culture for decades after the last of them retired from active duty. Others struggled with the transition to civilian life in profound and debilitating ways. The skills that made them valuable in war, the ability to kill without hesitation, to endure suffering without complaint, to follow orders without question, became liabilities in peace. They found civilian society confusing, its rules arbitrary, its concerns trivial compared to the life and death stakes they had known. Many turned to wine to dull the memories that haunted their sleep, images of comrades dying beside them, of enemies they had killed with their own hands, of battles won at terrible cost. The families of Evocati bore their own burdens, carrying the weight of their fathers' and husbands' wars. Children grew up with men who were physically present, but emotionally distant, trapped in memories of campaigns fought in distant lands. Wives learned to recognize the signs of approaching darkness, the thousand-yard stare, the sudden violent reactions to unexpected sounds, the nightmares that left their husbands screaming in the darkness. Roman society had no framework for understanding or treating what we would now recognize as profound psychological trauma. so these families endured in silence. The political ramifications of the Evocati system proved even more consequential than their military achievements. By creating forces loyal to individual generals rather than the state, Rome established a precedent that would haunt it for centuries. Future emperors and warlords would employ the same strategy, building personal armies of loyal veterans who owed everything to their patron and nothing to Rome itself. This dynamic fundamentally undermined the republican system, replacing civic duty with personal loyalty as the foundation of military service. The Senate attempted repeatedly to regulate or abolish the practice of calling veterans back to service, recognizing the threat it posed to traditional authority structures. But these efforts always failed, blocked by generals who had tasted the power that comes from commanding absolutely loyal forces. The precedent Caesar established proved impossible to reverse, and within a generation the Evocati system had evolved into the Praetorian Guard, elite soldiers sworn to protect the emperor personally, a private army residing in the heart of Rome itself. The transformation from republic to empire can be traced directly to innovations the Evocati represented. Once generals possess the ability to maintain permanent forces loyal to them personally, the incentive to compete for power through military might become overwhelming. Ambition combined with capability produced the civil wars that destroyed the Republic and elevated Augustus to supreme power. The Evocati did not cause Rome's transformation, but they provided the military instrument that made it possible and perhaps inevitable. Augustus understood this dynamic better than anyone, having witnessed its effects firsthand during the civil wars following Caesar's assassination. As emperor, he systematically dismantled the conditions that allowed the Evocati to exist as independent forces. He established regular pay and retirement benefits for all legionaries, removing the need for generals to personally reward their troops. He created a formal system for veteran settlements, ensuring discharged soldiers received land without depending on their former commanders. Most importantly, he claimed sole authority to summon forces of any kind, making the creation of private armies an act of treason against the state. These reforms gradually ended the Evocati as a distinct category of soldier, though the term continued to appear in military records for centuries. But the veterans who served under that designation became something else. Retired soldiers called back for specific administrative or ceremonial duties, not the elite shock troops who had terrified Rome's enemies and altered its history. The Shadow Legion faded into actual shadows, remembered primarily through the changes it had wrought on Roman military and political culture. The concept of elite veteran forces continued to fascinate military theorists and commanders throughout subsequent history. Napoleon's Old Guard, composed of veteran soldiers who had served with him through multiple campaigns, consciously echoed the Evocati model. Like their Roman predecessors, the Old Guard received higher pay, better equipment, and special privileges in recognition of their experience and proven loyalty. They served as Napoleon's personal reserve force, committed to battle only when the outcome hung in balance or a decisive blow could shatter enemy resistance. Modern Special Forces units inherit something of the Evocati legacy as well. The emphasis on selecting experienced soldiers for the most critical missions, the willingness to operate outside normal military command structures, the focus on building small units of exceptional capability rather than large armies of average quality. All these principles can be traced back to Caesar's Shadow Legion. The recognition that some military challenges require not just numbers or technology, but irreplaceable human experience and expertise remains as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago. Yet the Evocati also serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of creating military forces loyal to individuals rather than institutions. Rome learned through bitter experience that armies owing allegiance to commanders rather than the state ultimately destroy the very civilization they are meant to protect. This lesson has been forgotten and relearned repeatedly throughout history, from the collapse of the Roman Empire to the warlord era of medieval Europe, to the military coups that plagued 20th century developing nations. The temptation to build personal military forces proves nearly irresistible to ambitious leaders, despite the historical evidence of where such practices inevitably lead. The story of the Evocati thus contains multiple lessons that remain relevant across the centuries. It demonstrates the military value of experience and expertise concentrated in small elite units. It illustrates the psychological challenges of warfare and the difficulty of transitioning battle-hardened soldiers back to civilian life. It shows how military innovations can have profound and unintended political consequences that reshape entire civilizations. Most importantly, it reveals the fundamental tension between military effectiveness and political stability that every society faces when organizing its armed forces. Beyond strategy and politics, the Evocati remind us of the human cost of war, measured not in statistics, but in individual lives transformed and often destroyed by violence. These were men who gave everything to Rome: their youth, their bodies, their peace of mind, sometimes their lives. In return, they received gold and glory, respect and fear, but rarely the peace they had fought to secure for others. Their story encompasses triumph and tragedy in equal measure, victories purchased at prices that could never be fully repaid. The archaeological record preserves fragments of their existence: tombstones listing campaigns and battles, inscriptions recording honors received, personal items buried with the dead. Each artifact represents an individual life, a person with hopes and fears, family and friends, memories of home and nightmares of war. The Evocati were not mythical figures, but flesh and blood men who bled and died and suffered like all soldiers throughout history. Their exceptional skill and courage did not exempt them from the universal human experiences of pain, loss, grief, and trauma that war inflicts on those who wage it. In the end, the Evocati disappeared, as all military forces eventually do, replaced by new organizations suited to new circumstances. But their legacy endured in the military culture they helped shape, in the strategic concepts they pioneered, in the political transformations they enabled, and in the human stories they embodied. They were Rome's Shadow Legion, invisible in official records, but essential to understanding how the ancient world's greatest military power maintained its dominance and ultimately consumed itself in civil war. Their story deserves to be remembered not as myth, but as history, not as propaganda, but as truth about the costs and consequences of military excellence, pursued without restraint or accountability.